Hi everyone, Gigawatt here, just slapping together a really quick video here on some of the basics of Virindi Tank, also called just V-Tank for short, just for those who aren't familiar with it or who are just coming back to Asheron's call. So Virindi Tank is over on the left here. You'll see the little exclamation mark inside of the yellow triangle. You click on that, and it'll bring up a whole bunch of different tabs. Now, there's a lot more to Virindi Tank. There's a variety of other little plugins and stuff that sort of come with it's sort of a whole suite of plugins. But the basics of Virindi Tank itself, we're just going to go over kind of the different tabs, the basics of what you need to do just get yourself set up for some of the simpler use cases for Virindi Tank. And if anyone has anything specific they want to know, I'm happy to walk you through it. So on the basic options tab, you have monster. This is the range at which Virindi Tank will automatically attack. You usually want to keep that to something around, for like melees, or if you're inside of a dungeon, usually around 5. In my case right now, Gigawatt here is set up to 72 because he's pulling guys at long range for the rest of my army here. Ring range is the point at which a mage with a ring spell will cast rings or determine also how many monsters are within that sort of range. It'll then cast a ring, and those are sort of in the advanced settings, which we're not really going to go over here today. Approach and follow nav min, you don't really have to worry about too much. Those are sort of something you don't really have to toy with outside the default. The first set of settings here are basically what the current state of Virindi Tank is in. So me, right now, I have buffing enabled, so I'll automatically buff when my spells are about to run out. I have combat enabled, so I'm fighting. I have navigation enabled, so my guy's automatically running a navigation route that I have defined. I have looting turned on, so I'm running looting things based off of my looting profile that's actually set up in a little application in the Virindi Tank folder that is outside of Asheron's call. And I have a meta enabled. Now, meta is a bit more advanced. It allows you to basically set up like a little finite state machine where you can set all kinds of rules to say, if certain conditions are met, then carry out a different set of actions. It's very useful for character automation and questing and army control and things like that. I turn auto stack on, which usually is on by default, so it just automatically stacks things in your inventory for you. You can turn on auto cram, which will automatically just fill up your side packs before filling up your main inventory. Use dispel items. We'll use any dispel gems and things like that you may have in your inventory as long as you've actually defined them, which we'll cover in a minute. You have cast dispel self, so if you have the necessary dispel spells, you can turn that on. It'll automatically dispel negative enchantments on you. Autofill management is useful to turn on. This is so that when you encounter, or somebody encounters you, they can say XP and just tell you XP, and that will have you automatically recruit them into the fellowship. It's just good to do, generally speaking, as a courtesy, unless you specifically want to lock people out of your fellowship, in which case the best thing to do is usually just to lock your fellowship in the first place and keep the setting alone. Mana charges went off. Useful to turn that on. In my case, I use mag tools to handle that, but you can turn that on. It'll automatically use any mana charges you have defined in Virindi Tank as needed to recharge the various items you have equipped. Boost nav priority and boost light loot priority, and you can keep turned off by default. You don't have to worry about that right now. It is something that's useful later. Loot only rare corpses is something that you can select when you want to loot, but only when you discover a rare. So people who are rare farming will typically use that. Peace mode when idle is just like what it sounds like. When you're not actually in combat, it'll automatically put you back into peace mode. Rebuff when idle. That is what that'll usually do. I believe the default setting is 10 minutes before your buffs run out. It'll start rebuffing you. Only when you're idle though, but so that if all of a sudden a monster does approach you, you'll start fighting again, and it'll only force you really to rebuff at around the 5-minute mark. I believe that's the default anyway. It might be 10 and 20. Fast cast buffs, I keep it turned off. I don't really know what difference that makes. Don't shoot at walls is useful. Obviously, you don't want to be shooting at monsters through walls. Fallback debuffs if blocked. I actually don't know what that setting is, so I'm not going to talk about it. Summon pets is particularly for summoning. And by default, it will use whatever your monster range is, unless you set a custom pet range. And you can also set how many monsters have to be within range in order for you to summon a pet. Now, run macro. That's actually the to turn on Virindi Tank or turn it off entirely. Now in my case, I also have the Virindi UI options up here in the top right just for ease, so I can just minimize this, and I still have my controls up over here. Additional settings under profiles. Here's where you can save navigation profiles, loot profiles, and again, those are created with a little utility that's in the Virindi Tank classic looter folder, if I recall correctly. That's wherever you installed Virindi Tank 2. That's not covered here in this video. Frozen Valley, in this case, this is my meta that I have enabled. Again, for the beginner, not something you really need to worry about. Vitals are what you care about in order to set at what point do you want to heal or restam or regain mana at, as well as heal others. So by default, so for example, I have this character in white here who is my dedicated healer, they just keep the Fellowship tab open, which is sort of a requirement for this, and they will automatically manage healing people, restamming, and recovering mana for the rest of the members of the Fellowship. So his or her settings are actually much higher. And under the Monsters tab, this is a little bit more complex. Basically, across the top, you have the various different spells that you can cast either by default. The default rule is what will be used for anything that you are going to attack that is not explicitly defined elsewhere in the list. Now, in my case, I've built a bit of a list over time. Most of them really don't need to be here anymore, but I just haven't cleaned this out. And if you hover over each of these, it'll tell you what it is. So you can have it automatically fester, broadside of a barn, gravity well, imperil, yield, vuln, based off whatever the element is. And the ARS is what you're particularly going to care about if you are a mage or magic caster. So it's basically the attack, so the default bolts spells. There's S if you also want them to streak, and R is for ring spells. Now for the void mages, you also have the weakening curse, festered curse, corruption, so on and so forth that you can enable as you wish, either for specific monsters if you want to explicitly add them by either typing them in and clicking add, or by selecting them in Asheron's Call and then hitting add selected. Priority by default will be 1. You can set this to a higher priority, which means those with the higher number will be attacked first, and you can actually go to 0 or -1, in which case I forget what 0 does explicitly, but -1 just ignores them outright. By default, it will use whatever their default damage type is for them. There's a database that it's using that I don't recall the exact source. It's usually pretty accurate, but an occasion I've found I've had to come in here and actually specifically click on and click through to define a type of damage that I want to do for a particular monster. You can also select a type of vulnerability, which weapon to use, and whether or not you're carrying anything in your offhand. So this is useful for things like people who are dual wielding, as well as what type of pet damage and type of pet to use if you're using summoning. Now, items is particularly important. You do have to define any items that you want to use, such as weapons or shields or wands or pets. So in my case, I have my archer here, and he has his bows as well as his bronze orb as his default magic casting device, and I also have my various summons essences here as well. Now, under consumables, this is important for anything like healing kits or potions. Also for Blackmoor's Favor or Asheron's Lesser Benediction. If you have that, it's gained through an augmentation at higher levels, as well as any types of mana stones that you want to use. Now, I don't actually believe that you have to set spell components in here. I just may have added these a long time ago and never removed them. But anything that you want Virindi Tank to use automatically has to be in here. And so items and consumables are very important to populate. Buffs, you generally just leave it by default. It will buff based off of whatever your skills are and the availability of your spells and everything. But if you want to specifically blacklist or add extra buffs, so in my case, I add salvaging and leadership because for some reason it didn't want to do those automatically. I think leadership because I don't have it trained, but I wanted it buffed anyways. And salvaging, I'm not really sure why it skips that by default. What I will sometimes do is I will blacklist specific buffs if especially at lower levels where I may not be able to cast any of the higher level buffs, and I'm going to a buff bot instead for some of them. So generally speaking, you can leave these alone though. The route is a little bit more complex as well. You can create navigation routes for yourself, and there's a bunch of them that are available as well on from various different parts of the Asheron called community. In my particular case, my allegiance has quite a few of them that are out there. And there's Immortal Bob's website as well, and a few other places of repositories for both navigation routes as well as metas, pre-built metas, which are quite useful. Now, of course, depending on which server you are running, sometimes metas are not recommended because they don't allow unattended sort of combat macroing, which metas are heavily used for. In my case, it's pretty much the name of the game here on the server that I'm on now. For routes, you can basically, if I click add, it adds whatever my current point is as a route. I can add to tell it as part of this to use a particular portal or an NPC, or talk to an NPC, open a render. I can tell it to insert a recall. I can add it to instruct it to add a certain pause for a certain number of seconds, or a chat command. So in my case here, I've got a whole bunch of different points. It is a circular route, which means it starts from the top, or actually it starts from the closest available point to you when you start it, and then runs from basically down the list and then starts back at the top. There are other types, such as linear, which I believe starts at the beginning, goes to the bottom, and then works backwards. Follow is something that you can use, and actually if you click on a character and then you click follow character, I believe, I don't remember if there's a way to do that here right in the main window, but I use this little CF button up here in my mini remote, and if I've selected a particular character, it will by default then just follow that character. And there's also ways to do it via chat commands as well. If you do a once, it will cycle through the list once. And actually what you'll notice, and it may be alarming to you, is that as it passes each point, it removes it from the list. But if you have saved your navigation route, if the next time you go to reload it, all the points will be back there. It just removes them as you pass them. You can play around with those. They're pretty relatively easy to use. You just want to make sure that under profiles that you are, now by default it saves any changes that you make here. It is a good practice for your macro settings. If you click copy to, it will create a little command down in the chat window. You just give it a name. So I just name mine by character. So this would be Gigawatt. And for my other characters, I'd name them accordingly so that any settings that I create for Virindi Tank are saved, are unique and specific to that character. You can clear profile, but you want to be careful. Don't hit that. And you can also, and copy to works as well for navigation routes. So I would, if I want to start a new navigation route, I usually click copy to, type out, give it whatever name I want. If I've copied it from, like made a copy of an existing one of my routes, I will copy it, and then I can go in and either edit it to tweak it if it's an existing one, or I can just go clear nav profile. It wipes out the whole profile, and I can just start from scratch from there. So just be careful with some of those buttons. Make sure you're clicking the right ones. Now, metas we're not going to go into here today. They do get rather complex. And you can create them within the Virindi Tank UI here, but there's actually a dedicated editor called MetaF, or Meta as F. I'm really not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but it allows you to use something like, in my case, I use Notepad++. In order to basically write these as it's almost like pseudocode. And it's a way to much more reliably and faster and easier to make metas, but it's definitely a more advanced part of Virindi Tank. Now, for the loot profiles themselves, not really covering that here, but again, it's a separate tool. There's some good instructional videos out there on the Virindi Tank wiki, so go and take a look at them if you have any questions there. And if anyone does have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message either on Discord, I'm there as Gigawatt, or message me in game. All right, stay frosty.